So with that, we have two learning objectives. I like that you put it that way. Two learning objectives for this week. So we're going to focus today on what philosophy is and the value of philosophy. And then Thursday, we'll focus on logic. So the first thing that I want to talk about are some, again, it's going to be very terminology heavy, some different terms that we can use to help our understanding of what philosophy is, what it does, and then also help us as we go through the course so that we can organize the different types of philosophical ideas that we come across. So I did ask you all, though, to come to class with an idea of what philosophy is. So I'm going to ask everyone to take a minute or two. And even if you're brand new to the class and you didn't have a chance to look at anything yet, surely you've heard the word philosophy before. So like everyone to take a minute, type in to the chat what you think philosophy is. Good, Jalen, just good. Let's see everyone's ideas. Excellent. I love what I'm seeing. Good. So what I love that we're tapping into here is not just a notion of what philosophy is, but again, the many different areas that philosophy covers. And again, this is important for approaching and understanding all of the ways that philosophy can be valuable to our lives, hopefully. So let me first start off by saying that you could not get two philosophers probably to ever agree on a definition of philosophy, right? So there's not going to be like a strict one-off definition, but literally it does mean the love of wisdom. So philo means to love, Sophia means wisdom, right? So it's the love of wisdom. But yeah, it really is so much more than that because it is about the how, right? How we gain wisdom. And wisdom into all of the different things that you guys are talking about. And so I want to clarify for you, and this is in the reading, if for some of you who have gotten a chance to start that, there are four main subdisciplines of philosophy. So these are four different ways that we can categorize or talk about or approach the kinds of questions that philosophy asks. So the first one is logic, right? So that's the study of argumentation, with a set of rules and standards by which we would assess what counts as a good reason for something, right? So that's what we're going to start talking about on Thursday, and that's going to be sort of, again, a set of skills that underlays our writing assignment throughout the course. So logic is everywhere, right? I may have mentioned this on Thursday, but logic is also really relevant for coding, right? So understanding simple conditional statements. If this happens, then something else, right? That sort of relationship is basically what we're studying in logic, right? We're figuring out what follows from other things. So it can be very useful in lots of different ways. Applies to a lot of different things, but the other three are a little bit more descriptive. And those are metaphysics, epistemology, and axiology. So who thinks they know what any of these terms mean? Pick one. What does it mean? Maybe you've heard them before, side of philosophy. Maybe you did the reading. Excellent, Jordan. So metaphysics, right? So most of us are familiar with physics, right? The study maybe of reality or the laws of nature that govern reality. Meta means beyond, right? So metaphysics is just beyond the physics. So it's studying the nature of reality, right? What is, what exists, what things are like, but beyond what empirical data can tell us. So really, when you do like quantum physics these days, because the theories are not currently testable by modern technology, they're technically doing metaphysics with a lot of math, right? I'm sure the scientists would never say this, but but that's what they're doing, right? They're going beyond the physical evidence, the empirical evidence, and creating a model, an idea, a hypothesis, and a theory about the way things are. And so we can further break up metaphysics into two subcategories. The first one is cosmology, and that is the study of the origins of the universe or of the things that exist. Along with cosmology can sometimes be eschatology, which is the study of how things end. So if you're curious about how everything will cease to exist. And then the part in the middle, right, how things are now, is ontology. What is and what it is like. So when we categorize things like different types of species, right? That's a type of ontology, right? We're saying this is a thing. It has some particular sort of essence or criteria that makes it what it is, right? And so thus we can identify things in the world according to that, right? All of that work, that's all types of ontology. Okay, so the study of how things begin, how they exist now and go through change, and how they will exist in the future or cease to exist. So metaphysics, obviously, right, covers a lot of different things. We will be encountering lots of different metaphysics in our class and some very potentially unfamiliar metaphysical views, right? So when we start talking next week more about Eastern philosophy, what you're going to see is on the whole, right, this is a generalization because there's a lot of diversity in Eastern traditions as in the West, but on the whole, we tend to see different approaches, metaphysically speaking, from Western religious traditions versus Eastern religious and philosophical traditions. So in the West, we tend to see what is called a dualistic metaphysics, which means that things are always broken into two opposing forces, right? Good and evil, heaven and hell. Okay, male, female, right? All of this is this duality, right? Everything is two opposing forces. Whereas what we're going to see in the East, again, is potentially less familiar to you, is a monistic metaphysics, right? The idea that everything is part of one unified whole reality, right? That's symbolized a little bit with the yin yang, right? There's a little bit of yin and yang and vice versa, but it really is a much richer sort of symbiosis, I think, than most people in the West recognize, right? So again, terminology that's going to help us on the whole understand what we're learning and make those types of comparisons. So questions so far about metaphysics before I move on to some of the other subdisciplines. Next big area is epistemology. And so this is something I think a lot of you were thinking of when you were defining what you think philosophy is. And that is the study of knowledge and true belief, or really justified true belief, right? So for example, when we're studying religious traditions or, again, different metaphysical systems from the East and the West, right, we're going to have to talk about entities of divine status, right? So if there is a god or gods in a particular tradition, the metaphysical question would be about whether or not they exist. The epistemological question would be whether or not we could know that they exist, or whether or not we could be rational in believing in their existence, right? And so again, these sorts of distinctions might seem subtle or not very meaningful, but they're incredibly distinct, right? There are gaps between what it takes to argue that a being exists and what it takes to argue that it's just rational to believe that something exists, right? So we can have different standards for those things and different types of arguments. And this leads to other really interesting questions. Again, we're going to be focusing more on Eastern philosophy, but because Eastern traditions do interact with religion, if some of you are interested in philosophy of religion, right, there are lots of interesting topics you could maybe explore in your papers, right? So for example, when we're talking about religious epistemology, we would distinguish between things like reason, faith, right? So believing something based on evidence versus a lack of evidence, right? So being reasonable, right? Being rational, having good reason for something, right? We typically think that you have to have some sort of evidence to support it. Faith is believing in something, but just lacking evidence in favor of it. Now, a lot of people think that philosophers are going to like poo-poo all over faith, right? That's not always the case. There are, in fact, many really incredible arguments that argue for the rationality of religious faith, right? Based on the idea that, perhaps we can't ever have evidence for God, right? It's still rational to believe, right? Is sort of the idea. But what a lot of people in the real world mistake faith for is something else. And this is something that I want to be very clear, no philosopher will ever defend. And that is dogma, which is belief in something despite contrary evidence. Okay, so you're going to see lots right? Philosophy has nothing against faith, as long as you have a good argument for it, good reasons to believe based on faith. It doesn't have to be empirical evidence, but something else. Versus dogma, which is where you're believing something, but just ignoring all the evidence that goes against it, right? That would be epistemically irresponsible, according to philosophers. So lots of different ways to classify lots of different topics, right? We can approach it epistemologically, metaphysically, or the third one is axiology, which is the study of values. And in this case, we have, again, two subdisciplines: aesthetics, which is the study of beauty, art, and other non-ethical judgments. I should say non-moral judgments. And then we have ethics, which is the study of moral judgments, right? So what makes something right or wrong? What makes a person good or bad, right? These types of things. Could also throw existentialism in there. I think they go hand in hand, right? Does life have value? Does life have meaning? If so, what is it? Where does it come from? These types of things. So lots of different questions that we could ask ourselves. Hopefully this will help give you some maybe fireworks going off when you're thinking about your paper topic. You will have to pick a topic this week. You can always change your mind, but you want to get it nailed down sooner in the quarter rather than later, so that you can make use of our weekly drafts. But lots of different ideas of what philosophy is in the business of doing, right? So not just asking questions, but asking really big, heavy, significant, impactful questions, right? Questions that the answer you choose is going to have consequences. And so that is where I want to switch gears and start talking about the value of these questions, unless we have any questions about these terms. I haven't seen any, but I've been talking a while. No question? Yes, Joseph, go for it. So I think we can say potentially that both of them could be solved, but epistemology would be like saying not whether or not life has meaning, but can you know that life has meaning? Or is your belief in life's meaning true, right? That would be the epistemological question. But just straight what exists or what is, those are the metaphysical questions, right? Just about the nature of reality. But the epistemology is about the knower, right? Something about them, their state of beliefs, and in some cases, how they need to relate to the external world. But metaphysics is just about what exists, what it's like, how it started, how it will end. Does that help? Would the Flat Earth Society beliefs be an example of dogma? So actually, this is a great question. The Flat Earth Society has tons of reasons for why they think the Earth is flat. Now, the question then is, are they good reasons? I think they tend to err on the side of conspiratorial thinking, like that all planes are built with some conspiracy window that makes the Earth look curved. Stuff like that. That stuff's a little bit too much for me. But, the general skepticism of astronomy and science, like historically, is not unfounded. If any of you are studying astronomy, you might learn that there are a number of ways in which scientists hypothesize the existence of new planets, right? Or large bodies in solar systems. And even though those same methods, right, scientific methodologies, have been proven wrong in the past, falsified, in fact, we still use them today. So the same planetary detecting devices that we currently use to, we redefined what a planet is, which is why we lost Pluto. But, right, other than that, the way we determine where planets are, we used to think that there was another planet in our solar system called planet Vulcan. Have any of you ever heard of this? Any of you are science buffs? Yeah, if any of you are science or astronomy buffs, you got to learn about planet Vulcan. It has to do with, I forget which planet it is, but one of them has like a weird orbit where it sort of like wiggles a little bit. They demoted Pluto because of its size. But no, planet Vulcan doesn't exist, but for a very long time, it was, according to the scientists, it existed and it was in our solar system, right? So we thought for a long time that something existed and it didn't. And the methods that we used to establish its existence, again, are still methods we use today. So science is not always right. That's the point, is that you can't be dogmatic about it, right? You've got to be willing to update. Sorry, Pluto, right? We had to be willing to update our evidence and maybe even some of our metaphysical classifications there. But yeah, so whatever that wobble is with one of the planets, they thought that the parallax or something, they thought that was due to, the only way they could explain it, according to Newtonian physics, right? Because you have to keep it consistent with the paradigm of physical laws, right? The only way they could explain it was by saying, well, there must be another planet there that's affecting its orbit, right? So we didn't know enough yet. And so that sort of skepticism, again, is still very applicable today. So if any of you are interested in going into the STEM fields, the physics especially, there's going to be a lot of discussion of things like dark matter, dark energy. That's not a thing. Like, dark matter is just a word. It's just a phrase. It's a placeholder for a series of phenomena that scientists can't currently explain, right? And things that have not been able to be explained by other laws. So there's a lot that can be said about this, but this is all philosophy being done, right? This is all happening beyond, again, anything that we can yet verify empirically. And so we're dealing with models. They need to be able to explain real phenomena, but it just goes to show that we've gotten a lot wrong in the past. So we maybe ought to be willing to not be so sure about what we think we know now. And so again, I'm going to use this as a segue into Bertrand Russell's The Value of Philosophy, right? Where he's going to be conveying to you, or trying to convey to you, that it's actually the questions themselves in philosophy that are much more important than the answers. So I'm going to give you a second to think about this. Again, you can raise your hand or pop it in the chat, or maybe you've read it a little bit, but just thinking for yourself, why might asking a question be more important than getting a clear answer to it? Why could the questions be more important than the answer? Thanks for being so participatory, Joseph. The question establishes the way things are rather than how it got to be there. Do you mean the answer? Questions open the doors to more possibilities, more lines of thinking, new angles on the issue. You haven't asked the right one yet to seek the answer you need. Excellent, Sean. Sometimes even just the way we interpret the questions is important. Excellent, right? There are many ways we can interpret different questions, right? So like if I ask you all, do unicorns exist, right? You can say yes and no, and you could both be right depending on what we mean, right? Do I mean physical existence? Okay, well, right. Maybe some of you really want to think that unicorns at one time existed in the physical world, but clearly we can all picture a unicorn, right? So they exist in some way, right? Such that we're all able to come up with the same sorts of similar types of images. Yeah, good. Other ideas about the value of asking the questions? Sean's on the closest track so far. All right, so let me say this. Okay, if it's important to ask questions because it opens the door to new possibilities, right? We often say things like, you're opening your mind, right? There's literally like this expansion sort of thing going on. Or if we say someone's like a very big person, right? Or a very small person, we're not necessarily referring to their size. We might be referring to something about their character, right? With the way they approach the world and themselves. So that's what Russell's going to be getting at, right? That aspect of human life. And so when he starts off the paper, he's going to be using some words that most of us might see in everyday life in a more positive sense. He's going to be using them very pejoratively, meaning that is going to be saying very negative things about them, right? So he does not like things like practicality. He is not going to be arguing for customs or traditions. He thinks that these things are tyrannical. They literally close the mind. They make you not just a smaller person, but to him, a trapped person, someone who lacks freedom or liberty. Right. And so for him, asking questions is releasing yourself from those cages, right? All of the things that you were brought up being told were true that we never bothered to question. Right. And so he has this line that always stuck to me because I don't know about you, but I don't always love authority figures. I think that's probably true for most philosophers. But he has this line about, most of the things that we believe were brought up in our minds without our own conviction or consent, right? So think about that, right? If your autonomy is important to you, and then to think that most of your beliefs you didn't consent to, if that's true, that's really scary, right? It might as well be indoctrinated into something. But that's really how a lot of our beliefs are in the world, right? We only end up questioning the ones that we're forced to confront. And if your experiences aren't very broad or diverse, then you probably won't be questioning much of your assumptions and beliefs very frequently or very often, right? So Sean, excellent. I love the reference to Plato's cave. There is an excellent video. I'm not sure if I included it in the media. I hope I did. But yeah, the idea is that the person who doesn't ask questions, right, the person who thinks they've got everything figured out, they are the ones that are trapped in the cave, right? This is a metaphor for knowledge and intelligence and a way of being in the world. And it's only the philosophers, the people who are willing to ask questions, that are able to free themselves from the cave and go outside and see the truth, the sunlight, right? Not just look at the shadows on the cave walls and pretend that those are real, right? So that's all a metaphor for this journey that can only happen by embracing uncertainty, right? Which is so counterintuitive, right? We live in a world where, like, I'm sure people's anxiety and depression are like some of their biggest concerns. And I'm like, embrace uncertainty, right? But the idea is that perhaps it could even help alleviate those things, because when you are willing to be open to new possibilities in the world, they tend to be a little less frightening, right? And anxiety tends to be a fear of the unknown, right? Like, we lack control, and so it's scary. And unfortunately, it's the fear of the unknown that I think drives a lot of the things we wish could be different in the world, right? So exploring those questions, being willing to ask them, he says, is not just going to change your thinking, it's going to change the way you act in the world, right? So this is, again, that bridge between the things we think and the way that we act. And my favorite line in this reading, it's, again, could not be more relevant than this moment in time, is when he says that the person who engages in this kind of questioning, right, this philosophical contemplation, he says that they will become citizens of the universe, not of one walled city at war with the rest, right? So I don't know about you, but I would much rather be a citizen of the universe, right, than just cordon myself off into a rosy bubble of whatever I decide I want to believe, okay? Now, if that might work for some people, that's totally fine. This is all about you and choosing what you're willing to explore, but we will be exploring a lot of heady stuff in this class. And so these terms will just help us keep track and organize those questions. Again, it's not my job to tell you what the right answers are. We will merely be exploring lots of possible answers, and hopefully through that process, right, your minds will open and you will either end up being really confused or be very excited about all the new possibilities. Good. Also, I don't remember who did this, but the whole idea of starting all your beliefs from scratch and only believing what you can prove. Excellent. That was Descartes, actually. Yeah. Descartes is the idea of foundationalism, actually. And so he's the French philosopher who sat in the armchair and basically tried to deconstruct everything that he thought he believed. And so his idea was, I can only know something if I cannot question it, right? If it's, the word he used was indubitable, right? So clear and concise that it can't be questioned. And so he organized all of his beliefs, because we believe a lot of things. So he had a whole methodology for how to do it. And he went through and he came up with a hypothesis, right? Very scientific. A hypothesis for doubting each set of beliefs. And he arrived at one point, one indubitable point that he said he could not doubt. And since you brought it up, I'll just see, does anyone know what it is? It's a very famous quote. There have been excellently punned coffee shops named after it. I think, therefore I am. Very good. No, that's right. I drink, therefore I am is the pun. Which is a great bar or restaurant, cafe thing. But yes, I think therefore I am, right? Because the idea is that doubting is a form of thinking. So even if you're doubting your own existence, there's still a being in existence that's doing the doubting, right? That's the short version. So you can't doubt it, right? It's a vicious circle because the doubting is the thinking. So yeah, and then from that, he rebuilt his whole system of knowledge on that foundation. It's a very important signifier. And actually, our book is going to do a great job of connecting figures like Descartes, and another big important figure was David Hume. There's going to be a lot of important comparisons of note, right, between the Eastern philosophies we're going to look at and the philosophies that are more well known in the West, but that came many years later, right? So a lot of these Western guys are given credit for ideas that, we could say Eastern philosophers maybe came up with versions of long before. I think the biggest one for you all is going to be the negative golden rule. So this is part of axiology, right? Ethics. And it's how we treat other people. Most of you are familiar with the golden rule, but in Eastern philosophy, we're going to see the negative golden rule and talk about the differences there. Good. All right, so we have about 8 minutes of class left. I think I've hit all of the highlights of introducing ourselves to philosophy. Again, you're not going to walk away with a clear definition of what it is, but it's definitely going to be involving the exploration of the fundamental questions, right, that we ask ourselves, right? So the study of those questions, the love of knowledge, all of that works. But then we definitely want to note those 4 main subdisciplines, right? Logic, metaphysics, epistemology, axiology, and then the types of questions that we ask in each of those. We went through a lot of examples. There's more in the PowerPoint. Have a wonderful day.